Alrighty, it is 6 p.m., so I guess we'll get started here. Thank you for joining us tonight for our third installation of the Winter Webinar Series and first event of 2026. Happy New Year. Hope everybody is well and healthy, especially with all the crazy bugs that are going around right now. This session is going to have like close to 750 people joining us, which is kind of a new thing for us. So we're very happy for the interest, but hopefully WebEx isn't going to be kind of fluky with us, because normally we have up to like 499, but with the demand we lifted it. So it should be interesting for us here this evening as well. Rules of the road in terms of audio, hopefully you can hear me talking. If not, feel free to use the Q&A feature and we can give you some ideas, but most of your chances for audio are in the audio drop-down and under audio conference, so you can have the system call you, you can call in, you can log back out and log back in and see if your issue's resolved. Don't call our office because nobody is there. That's the audio dial-in. If you're having a lot of really hard time, and then just follow along with the handouts that John Furtado sent earlier today. Unfortunately, we are not IT professionals, and we don't get to pick our software. I know that WebEx can be pretty difficult sometimes with people. It is with us as well. But unfortunately, it's the software that is assigned to us. Ask questions, use the Q&A feature. We'll try to answer as many questions as time permits. We are lucky to have one of our newest trainers, James Bragg, on us to help with Q&A. We also have our host, John Furtado, here to handle some of the tech stuff. Hopefully everything goes well. He is also the certificate guru, so certificates will be emailed in the next week. John's pretty on it, so you might get them tomorrow if you're lucky, but give us about a week to get through that, just because there's so many people. And it's tough to go through the Excel spreadsheets that we get on the back end. Just be aware that WebEx is watching. Those who log in late or leave early aren't really paying attention, might receive only partial credit. Otherwise, my name is Paula Gilbert. I am joined here by my other fellow trainer, Monica Ryan. And
Hello.
essentially, we are here to teach everybody planning board overview. So Monica's going to get us started. I'm going to pass the control of it over to her, and we'll get going because we have a lot to cover tonight. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Paula. So tonight, as Paula said, we're doing planning board overview. This is truly an overview course. We have many of the topics we'll cover tonight. We do have in-depth trainings on those topics as well. So if you do have questions, which I'm sure you will, especially if you're new board members and you've just joined your boards, whether you're a planning board member or even if you're on as a listening tonight as a zoning board member or local government official or staff person, know that we are here to support local governments and boards in your roles. That is our main function here at our division. So you can call us, you can email us. If you have questions after tonight and we don't get to your question, you can certainly pick up the phone or email us, and we can talk to you about things that we talked about tonight. Another option is our in-person training, which we do have throughout the year. We work with our county planning partners, our regional planning board partners, and statewide organizations at conferences to provide in-person training as well. So you can potentially catch us there for some of those other topics that we will discuss tonight, but not as in-depth, because we do want to touch a little bit on everything. So the course overview is to first talk about the statutory authority that establishes the planning board and the roles that may be delegated to the board. We'll talk about the importance of the comprehensive plan, We'll go over the most common reviews that a planning board is tasked with, and then we'll wrap up with a discussion of the seeker process, potential referrals that may be required, meetings and hearings, and then the decision that you're making, voting, and decision documents and how to file those. So we'll start with the powers and duties. So the planning board is an administrative body that is authorized in statute to provide a variety of advisory and regulatory roles. And we'll talk about each type of role, but basically advisory roles are inherent to the planning board and do not require additional authorization, while regulatory roles must be authorized at the local level. So even though statute talks about establishing a planning board and some of the administrative roles and reviews that they can provide, you must have the same authorization at the local level in the form of either a local law or ordinance. And the text box that you see on the screen, we'll have many of these tonight, but these are the references to statute. So if you're in a city, you would look at general city law, towns will look at town law, and villages look at village law. And you'll find there the establishment of planning boards, and then throughout these laws, you'll find different references to roles that the planning board can have. And we'll have a variety of these text boxes tonight that you can then go and read through the statutes when you have time. So the planning board is a public body, and planning board members are public officers, and so therefore they must meet the qualifications and standards of conduct that are found in public officers law. And we will talk about the qualifications here. So you must be at least 18 years old, a United States citizen, and a resident of the municipality for the board that you're planning to serve on. Governing statute does speak about governing board members. When we talk about governing board members, we're talking about, we use that term a lot. So just to be clear on what we're referring to there, local governing boards are town boards, village boards of trustees, and in cities, city councils or common councils. So we sort of use the overarching local governing board term to cover all three, because it can be a mouthful if we have to refer to them over and over again. So that's who we are referring to. Local governing boards are in charge of adopting all laws and ordinances in New York State at the local level, so they would be charged with providing at the local level any laws that are necessary in order for you to do your job properly. So local governing board members cannot serve on the planning board while they're elected officials on their governing board, and that is actually part of statute. If you live in a village, and villages are also in towns, so village residents can serve on a village planning board as well as a town planning board. But town residents living outside the village, so outside that boundary, would not be able to sit on both the village planning board and the town planning board. So that's just something we like to mention, because we do get lots of questions about participating on both boards. In terms of the composition of the board, that authority again comes down from statute and is given to the town board for appointing all planning board members, the mayor in cities, and the village mayor with approval of the Board of Trustees in villages. And the planning board can be comprised of either 5 or 7 members, and the terms are equal to the number of members of the board. So if you have a 5-member board, you would have a 5-year term. 7-member board, you should have 7-year terms. We do see sometimes, if you're sitting on a board and saying to yourself right now, gee, I only have a 5-year term, you can, a local government can adopt a local law where they supersede statute using municipal home rule law and make those terms, even on a 7-member board, 5 years if they follow the proper process for superseding statutes. So you may have that in your community. Each term is a staggered term, so there should be 1 member's term up per year if you're following the 5 years, for instance, 5-year term for 5-member boards. And the purpose of that is for a couple of purposes, actually. So it allows for there to be carryover and institutional knowledge on the board from year to year. And the consistency that comes with that is important so that there's not turmoil every time, you know, a town board might turn over. It allows for there to be some consistency on the planning and zoning boards. In addition, it sort of insulates the planning board and zoning board of appeals, for that matter, from political changes. So that because a board could not be turned over, could not all turn over in one year, so, or during one board's administration. So it has that benefit as well. All board members do need to take an oath of office within 30 days after being appointed to the board. So if you're a new board member that was just appointed today or last week, you do have 30 days to take the oath of office, which is administered by your local municipal clerk. And it is an important step. You're not technically official unless you've taken that oath. If you are already on the board and are thinking to yourself, gee, I don't remember taking an oath of office, that is something you will want to take care of, because without taking that oath, your seat could be appointed, a different person could be appointed to that seat at any time. It does not mean that your votes, if you've been voting and you didn't take the oath, it does not mean that your vote does not count towards those decisions. So it's okay in that regard, but you do want to file that oath because that is part of your official role. If 30 days expires, then you technically need to be reappointed prior to, and then take the oath. So that process still needs to take place. And then we'll talk about the importance of a quorum a couple of times in this presentation. A quorum is the number of members who must be present for business to be legally conducted. And a quorum is, because you are a public body, it is a majority of the fully constituted board, and that includes absences as well as vacant seats. So if you are on a 5-member board, then in order to conduct any business, you would need 3 members. In order to conduct business on a 7-member board, you would need 4 to be seated that night. And the statute regarding this is found in General Construction Law in Section 41. But keep this in mind, because really there is no business. Even opening the meeting requires a motion and then enough board members to be there to support that motion. So really no business should ever take place without that quorum. So in order to help with quorum issues, the planning board can have alternate members. Those members may be appointed if you have a local law, or as part of establishing your planning board, there is a provision that allows for the appointment of alternates. Statute talks about the availability of using alternates and provides a process for that, but you must, just like establishing the planning board in general, you must also include appointing alternates in your local law or ordinance. So that's something that has to happen at the local level as well. And in that local law, you can set the number of alternates to any number you wish, and the length of each office. So it does not have to be 5 and 7 years like the regular planning board members. It can be 1 year, 2 years, whatever the local governing board decides on that. However, that also gets written into your local law. So statute allows for alternates to be used only for purposes of addressing somebody who needs to step down because of a conflict of interest on an application. So statute doesn't talk about using alternates for other reasons. So if you would like to use alternates for a different reason, you would again need to supersede statute using municipal home rule law, and you could define other reasons for using alternates in your community. We know there are difficulties in getting a quorum and maintaining board members, so this is an option that many communities have taken. And so they may include reasons such as illness, vacations, helping with loved ones, et cetera, who knows. But you can include other reasons if you establish that at the local level. And alternates are appointed in the same manner as regular board members. So that would be the town board and the city mayor and the village mayor plus board of trustees appoint alternates. They also must take the oath of office just like regular members. And then for appointing a chairperson is very important. So hopefully on your board you do have a chairperson. Those are also appointed in the same manner as regular board members. So a chair statute provides that the chairperson is appointed by the town board, village board of trustees, and mayor, and the city mayor. So that is the process. If a chairperson has not been appointed, statute does allow for the planning board members themselves to elect and appoint an acting chair. And you can also appoint a vice chair, which we would recommend because chances are your chairperson will need to miss a meeting or two. And so they would act as long as no official chair is appointed by your local governing board or mayor, depending upon your location. So that is something that we highly recommend happen early on in the year, and they are typically appointed just for the year, so they will have to be reappointed on an annual basis. Some of the duties of the chairperson include the obvious one of presiding over meetings and hearings. They can also supervise the agenda setting for each meeting. Depending upon whether you're in a smaller community or a larger community, you may have staff, you know, a clerk, a planner, your zoning enforcement officer who is integrally involved in helping to process applications and set the agenda. They would work with the chairperson. But in really small communities, the chairperson may be serving in that role, or you might have meetings, work sessions that allow you to set the agenda with your board members. You may also be, the chairperson may also be a liaison to your local governing board. They typically sign official documents such as site plans and plats that are approved and resolutions. Any of your decision documents, they may be providing a signature on those. And they may be tasked with making sure that all the official documents get filed with your municipal clerk. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Paula to discuss conduct and ethics.
Great. I see that we had a couple of questions about difference if, you know, people can sit on the planning board and the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah, Paul, I was going to ask you to kind of give more clarification on that.
Okay, so you can sit on both your planning board and zoning board of appeals, but we do not recommend this, mostly because if an application has something that requires work from both of them, say it's a site plan before the planning board and it needs an area variance, that member can only vote on something once. So that means that they would have to hedge their bets on where their vote is most important. So if you have issues like achieving quorum in your community, it makes it even more difficult to try to find enough people to actually carry motions and vote with enough people. Another one that came through was if a village trustee can serve as a town planning board member. Yes, they can, mostly because they are two different, a village and a town are different municipal structures. So, so there's no incompatibility of office there. The only thing you can do is if you are the village trustee and then sit on the village, town, or town planning or zoning board. Oath of office is mostly just work, and you go into the office and you basically sign the oath. Your clerk usually handles it at the beginning of the year, so just keep an eye open for that because you'll want to do that this month for any new members. I think we kind of caught up there.
And they just had a question for the appointment of chair of how that is done.
Yeah, it's really up to the municipality to figure that out. Usually it's the governing board, but the board itself together might decide on a vice chair, or your governing board might actually appoint both the chair and the vice chair. It really depends on how it's set up in your own municipality. Oh, one other one that's actually a really good question. Can a town code enforcement officer serve on the planning board? Technically, the answer is yes. They cannot sit on the zoning board if they also serve as the zoning enforcement officer. Okay. All right, so conduct and ethics. So members may be removed for office for cause. And cause is one of those terms that's defined locally, so it's up to the municipality, the local governing board to decide. But typically, the big reasons that we see for removal of members is things like poor attendance. So you're just not showing up for the meetings. It makes it really difficult to achieve quorum and kind of keep things moving. Continued inappropriate behavior. You may have a ethics kind of code that explains, like, you know, hopefully you don't have to explain to people that you should be kind of working with each other and getting along with each other, but we've heard all the stories from everywhere. So we've heard of things where board members arguing or swearing at, you know, applicants or other board members. You definitely don't want things to get off the rails like that. Or another one is failure to receive your training, which we'll talk about in the next slide. However, you can't just say you're off the board. The governing board has to hold a public hearing before you remove a member for my VPN is like dropping, so hopefully we are not losing my audio in the middle of this as well. Okay, so state training requirements. So luckily you're here for training tonight. It's 4 hours annually. Excess hours can be carried over without any limitations. Failure to comply with your training requirement doesn't void your decision. It just makes you ineligible for reappointment when your term is up. Your governing board will track and approve your training. We don't do the tracking in-house. This is why we give out certificates after you come to our webinars. There's a variety of sources and formats. My personal favorite is in person, but we do webinars. We had to do webinars throughout the pandemic, so we're kind of used to it, but all different sorts of people out there that are also in the game. The requirements can be waived or modified so long as it's in the best interest of the municipality by resolution of the governing board. What do we mean by that? That mostly is for if you have somebody like a professional land use planner on your planning board, you might waive their training requirements because they do it as part of their everyday work. However, I think I kind of laugh when we go around. A lot of our county planners actually serve on the boards of their own municipalities, and a lot of time it doesn't get waived. So it makes your municipal insurance carrier happier when you're getting training as well. So hopefully you're doing that, and thank you again for coming for training tonight. And those state training requirements and statute actually also apply for alternates to the board as well. So something to keep in mind. All right, so we kind of got over we've kind of gone over all the like basic stuff that is like the introduction to all of our courses for planning board, for zoning boards as well. This sets us up really for the rest of the training tonight. So planning boards have both advisory and regulatory roles. So we'll start with the advisory roles and then we'll work our way into the regulatory. So advisory roles just mean that planning boards have an inherent advisory power to recommend regulations relating to anything within the planning board's jurisdiction. So that's mostly like land use and development issues in your community. You can make investigations, you can have maps and reports and make recommendations in all matters concerning planning and development, whether you're asked or not, kind of like a pesky mother-in-law. And most of the way we see this is through the development of the municipal comprehensive plan, but also if you're considering maybe using municipal land for a new opportunity, or thinking about capital budgets or more long-term planning, this is where the planning board can sometimes be really helpful. The governing board can, by resolution, assign additional powers of advisement, like referrals to the governing board. Again, it's up to your governing board to figure this out. That would be things like not allowing final action is stipulated upon the receipt of the planning board's recommendation. You know, most of the time, though, we see this through the adoption of, or the preparation of the comprehensive plan. Then in statute, we have a thing called the direct appeal approach, which is quite interesting. And this is where, hopefully, in the best municipalities, we have where the planning board and the zoning board of appeals really work well together and rely on each other for advice. Remember, you're all playing for the same team. You want the best for your municipality. So it's really important, especially when you have that good working relationship across the boards, because of things like the direct appeal. So the direct appeal is for area variances for subdivision, site plan, or special use permits. And the kind of funny thing about it is the applicant doesn't actually have to get a decision from the zoning enforcement officer. They go directly to the zoning board of appeals for their area variance. In those cases, especially for subdivision, the zoning board of appeals has to request written recommendation from the planning board. Now, in real life, I think sometimes you, especially for subdivision site plan and special use permit, a lot of times if the planning board is the one doing the work and really the area variance is pretty minor, it makes a lot of times more sense to start with the planning board just to have that conceptual kind of opening of what is expected out of the application itself, and then recognize, hey, you're going to need an area variance throughout this process, and then send them over to the zoning board of appeals for that area variance. You don't really want to wait for the area variance to the very end of the application, just because if it doesn't go that way, it might end up making the entire application really difficult, and so the planning board loses out on their time overlooking the application as well. So again, having that kind of open dialogue between the boards is really important so that you kind of have an idea, a pulse of, you know, finger on the pulse of what's happening before both boards. So that is the direct appeal approach. And then, like I mentioned before, the comprehensive plan. So what is a comprehensive plan? And essentially, by statute, it's the statement of a community's vision, an expression of the municipality's goals and recommended action to achieve those goals. Hopefully, it's providing kind of short, medium, long-term goals and kind of providing the roadmap to get to achieve those goals. And usually we do that through in the form of new or revised land use regulations. So I always think of the comprehensive plan as like the base or the foundation of our land use regulations in our municipalities. It should be guiding you, so it serves as a framework. It should be a defense for your land use regulations. Again, the short, medium, long-term goals. And really should be providing you kind of an idea of what orderly growth and what priority community investments you want to do in the future, and helps provide continued guidance for decision making. So it's one of those things that once you prepare it, shouldn't just sit on a shelf somewhere. It's something you want to kind of keep working towards, keep going back to make sure that the applications before you are in alignment with the goals of your comprehensive plan. So we often get asked, when's it time to update our comprehensive plan? And really the big one is the age of the plan. If you haven't done an update since 1982, it's probably time to do an update to your comprehensive plan. There's also a periodic review provision in statute about comprehensive plans. So it basically just says that a municipality should go back every couple of years, take a look, make sure that the plan is still working for them. But other things might be going on in your municipality as well that are important to keep in mind. So you might be a community that's rapidly growing or maybe declining, or you need new infrastructure, or your infrastructure is maybe inadequate. It's a lot of times a good reason to go back and look at your comp plan. Maybe your community character is at risk, or special places are disappearing, or maybe you have significant environmental or economic changes. Maybe a large employer is either proposed to be coming to your community, like we've heard for Micron in central New York, or maybe you're losing a large employer, which will definitely have impacts on your municipality. And then how does the comprehensive plan, or how does the planning board fit into this? And that is the entire planning board can act as the comprehensive planning special board. So a lot of times these are called like comp plan update boards, or something similar. So the entire planning board can act as that special board, or in a lot of municipalities you kind of want different voices. So in that case you might have some local business members, or people who are long-term residents of your municipality, and in that case at least one planning board has to sit on the special board. Basically that board then makes recommendations on the proposed plan. If you hired a consultant, they would be working with that consultant to kind of come up with what your comprehensive plan is going to look like. They also oversee the community engagement, so there's usually a lot of workshops. You kind of get an idea of what people want to see, what they like and don't like about your community. It kind of helps guide where you want to go. In terms of community engagement, the board that's preparing the plan has to have at least one public hearing with that draft plan before they send it to the governing board, because adoption is a legislative act. It's up to the governing board to do it. So again, also one of those reasons why you can't sit on the planning board. If you're a governing board, you'd be kind of overseeing your own work. So adoption is up to the governing board. Hopefully they're all excited about doing it as well. And then why is the comprehensive plan important? And that's because really all of our land use regulations, but especially our zoning, needs to be in accordance with a comprehensive plan or a well thought out plan. It should also provide the defense against spot zoning challenges in your municipality. Spot zoning is where you change the zoning of one parcel to the benefit of the owner and the detriment of everybody else. And really your comprehensive plan also should just be providing that ongoing basis for any other actions that are affecting development in your community. So if you are thinking about maybe extending your underground utilities like sewer or water. You know, that's something hopefully you've contemplated where development makes the most amount of sense in your community. Hopefully we're seeing that kind of getting driven into our kind of village and hamlet centers. And then we're often asked, well, where do we come up with the money for it? So at the Department of State, we have our Smart Growth Grant round from our colleagues in the Office of Community Planning and Planning Development and Community Infrastructure, and the Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. In our shop, we have the Local Government Efficiency Program. So if you can get two municipalities to come together like a town and village, and they want to do a joint, comp plan or joint zoning, which we've seen, that would be something that would qualify for that grant. Our friends at DEC have Climate Smart Communities grants, which have been paying for comprehensive plan updates, and our friends at Ag and Markets have the Farmland Protection Planning grants, which is an ongoing program where they'll pay up to $25,000 for the agricultural component of your comprehensive plan. So that can be pretty great too. All right, so that covers most of our advisory roles. I'm going to send it back over to Monica to talk about the regulatory authority.
Thanks, Paula. James, just before we go on, did you have any key questions? I see that there are a lot, so it might be something that we want to wait a little longer on, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to catch up a little bit. They're all coming in at once, so I appreciate the invitation.
Okay. I'll just give James some time to respond, and we'll try to catch some as we go in a little bit. All right, so on to the regulatory role of the Planning Board. So the Planning Board is an administrative body that's designated in statute. However, local governing boards can designate the Planning Board to serve in a variety of regulatory roles. And that is the common things such as reviewing subdivisions, applications. We'll talk about all of these: site plan review, special use permits. All of these could be roles that are delegated to the Planning Board. The only one that is specifically delegated to the Planning Board is subdivision review, and that is explicit in statute. Otherwise, while the Planning Board is mentioned, those other reviews could be delegated to another, quote, administrative body other than the Planning Board. However, so once these roles are delegated to the Planning Board, that ends the governing board's role in applications, et cetera. So there is no role for the local governing board in reviewing applications that have been delegated to the Planning Board to review, unless you have something in your law or ordinance that carves out certain reviews for the local governing board. So sometimes we do see that on particularly sticky subjects or more complex subjects, that there might be certain types of activities that are carved out for your governing board to review rather than the Planning Board, or maybe the Planning Board has only a recommendation role in those applications. But absent that scenario, once it's delegated to you, the governing board should let you do your job. They may not always be happy with your decisions, but there is not a role for them to step into your proceeding. So they really should just sort of stay at arm's length and allow you to do your work. The extent of the regulatory powers that the Planning Board has must be identified in your local laws and ordinances, and it may be specific to how you handle applications, what is required to be submitted to you, the Planning Board making the decision on whether or not an application is complete based on those submission requirements, making sure that fees have been paid, all of those things prior to making a decision on an application. Now we'll talk about some of the types of reviews that are most common for planning boards. And again, this is very much an overview. We do have full courses on all of the topics we're about to discuss. So we are, yes. We're only able to sort of touch on them and give some key concepts, but we do have other resources out there for you to learn about these reviews and, of course, to potentially take our other trainings. So the first is boundary or lot line adjustments. So these are, or some you might hear the term BLA. This is where two property owners are applying or would like to adjust lines of property, so shifting property boundary lines without creating any additional new lots. So it's not the subdivision of land because you're not creating a new lot, but you are seeking to adjust property lines for one reason or another. And we have some examples here in the box. Oftentimes it's to correct physical encroachments between properties. Every property owner does not know where their boundary line is, and sometimes neither adjoining property owner knows where their lines are. And they make assumptions, and all kinds of activities end up being built on the adjoining property or on the property line. So sheds, garages, pools, driveways, sometimes homes, or other principal buildings even could be built too close to the property line or over the property line. And so to correct for these scenarios, you might need to do a boundary or lot line adjustment. There are legal settlement of disputed boundary lines that might require a lot line adjustment. Or it could be just a scenario where property owners are fully aware of where their lines are. They want more land because to do more activity, either close to the boundary line or just because they need more land for one reason or another, and their neighbor is willing to sell them a slice of their lot, and so they want to gain a little more land or sell a little bit of land. So lots of different reasons. These are not subdivisions, and so the process is really up to the your local laws and ordinances to decide how to address these. There are communities that don't address them at all. In that case, the property owners would make bring their adjusted deeds or potentially a survey to the county and could file those maps and deeds on their own. But in communities that do require review, it is most commonly something that either the planning board reviews, or it might be done at the staff level. Particularly in larger communities, it might be the planning staff or code enforcement officer that might review lot line adjustments. If at the planning board you are doing these reviews, what you should be looking for is making sure that that change will not create a non-conforming lot if you have zoning, and that something that is proposed wouldn't create, for instance, not enough lot width or lot road frontage, or might create an undersized lot. This is something that hopefully your zoning enforcement officer would also catch. But this, and that you're not creating scenarios where you're now encroaching too closely on your own boundary line for, on somebody's boundary line for existing structures. So because there are typically setback requirements. And then just making sure the lot changes make sense. This can be an expedited process, just requiring potentially just one trip to the planning board. It doesn't require a public hearing unless you require one at the local level. We would recommend that you require a survey to be prepared for any of the lines that will be adjusted, because that is a good legal instrument to include along with the deed description when it's filed with the county. So we do recommend that a survey be done and included as part of the submission to the planning board.
And Monica, we just have two follow-up questions
Okay.
on lot line adjustments.
Sure.
Is a lot line deletion the same as a lot line adjustment?
In a sense, it is. It's more of a lot merge. So if you're merging two lots, if that's what that is describing, lot merges can require a trip to the planning board and can be included as a boundary or lot line adjustment. Some communities do not require that, and there might be a form that the assessor has the property owners provide, doing that lot merge, and it takes place more as a administrative process through the assessor's office. It's really a local decision on how those are handled, because I do know that some communities do still require a merge to go to the planning board, but it really is a local decision.
And if the village itself owns the lot involved, would the local governing board take lead status and handle both the transfer and review, or does that stay with the planning board?
Well, the village board is not necessarily subject to their own laws, but it's great if they're willing to go through use of, to use those. I would say, again, it depends whether or not you require lot merges to even go before the planning board, because in some communities that's not required at all. So it might just be something that the assessor needs to handle. So that again, it depends upon the community, but if the village wants to follow their own process, they could take that to the planning board if that's normally what's required, or they could probably just have the assessor file the paperwork for them. I think that would be my answer to that. All right, moving on. So subdivision. So subdivision is, I would say, the workhorse of certainly any rural community. Any community with a lot of land still to develop or consider developing will see more subdivision applications than probably anything else. In cities and villages, I would say this is less common because there's just a lot less land left to play with typically. So you see a lot fewer subdivisions and more probably lot line adjustments, if anything. But statutorily, the definition of a subdivision is the division of a parcel of land into a number of lots, blocks, or sites with or without streets for the purpose of sale, transfer of ownership, or development. And so when we talk about the purpose for sale, transfer of ownership, or development, somebody may propose a subdivision but not plan to do any of those things. They just want to create a second lot for themselves. That's fine. That's still a subdivision, and it's all of those should be treated the same as if the parcel was going to be developed tomorrow, in the sense that it's really important that as a planning board, when you're reviewing subdivision proposals, that you're making sure that only developable lots are being created. That is the #1 thing to be keeping in mind. And whether it's a 2-lot subdivision or a 20-lot subdivision, that should be always in the back of your mind when you're deciding whether or not to approve newly created lots. Because this is such an important tool, and it's one of the oldest tools that communities have had, land subdivision decisions have really sort of shaped how our communities have developed, the patterns of development, the density that we see, whether or not things function well when it comes to your streets or infrastructure may have to do with subdivision decisions, or whether or not land that maybe shouldn't have been developed got developed because there was a lot was approved. The creation of lots is the most active way to create growth and development, because you need more lots in order to get growth and development. So it's a really important role that the planning board has. The process for the subdivision is very well developed and specific in statute, more so than some of the other reviews. So I would strongly recommend looking at the statutory language related to subdivisions, which we do have on the screen here, because it is more specific than some of the other reviews, and it's important that our planning boards are following that guidance. So statute provides for communities to define major and minor subdivisions, and then sets up a process for each of these, a process for minor subdivisions and major. But the definitions themselves come from local regulations. So within your subdivision regulations, there should be a definition of both of these, minor and major, or it's possible that you treat them all the same, but this must be defined at the local level. There is no statutory definition. The typical types of thresholds for minor versus major, the number one thing is the number of proposed lots. Commonly, anything more than 4 lots or 5 lots or 3 lots would become a major subdivision. Anything less than that would be a minor subdivision. Again, that's got to be defined locally. And then in instances where maybe only a few lots would be created and it would normally meet the definition of a minor subdivision, you may have a definition that says unless you're constructing new streets or extending streets or other infrastructure such as sewer and water, or maybe there's other configurations of lots that would trigger a major subdivision review. So those are common thresholds to include in definitions around the state. And again, it's something that you will need to understand, because depending upon whether a project falls under the category of a minor or major subdivision, will set that review down a specific path for that review process. So in terms of some of the elements that are required in that review, when you're, again, I already talked about making sure you have a developable lot, but you're also looking at individual lots in relation to each other if more than one is being proposed to be created in addition to the original lot, as well as within a neighborhood, the existing street that additional lots may be proposed to be created on, within a and within maybe it's a second phase of a subdivision, whatever the environmental, the surrounding properties, however they exist, you are also looking at these new lots in relation to those surroundings. You're also looking for how those lots will be supported by local infrastructure, roads, whether or not it's on-site septic and water versus sewer. You'll have to look at stormwater management and drainage considerations, access to sites. Are they accessible from a public road or is it a private road? How do you feel about those private road scenarios? Do they make sense? You may need to consider sidewalks, curbing, landscaping, and other utilities, and how those will be provided to serve those new lots. So all of this can be part of your subdivision review. What's really important to remember is that the criteria for your review of these elements must be included in your local regulations. So it's important to get familiar with what's in your actual regulations with regard to these elements. If you are concerned about something that is not necessarily provided for in your regulations, it may be more difficult to make those requirements stick when you're reviewing projects. And for those of you that have zoning and review subdivision, zoning is probably providing a lot of framework for how lots will be configured, and how and what is allowed and what makes sense, may have all to some extent been predetermined by your zoning regulations. For communities that have subdivision review but do not have zoning, it is a little bit more of a difficult task for you planning board members in that scenario, because you don't have sort of a set of rules that the applicant needed to follow going into the process. So your job is a little tougher, we would say, if you don't have zoning to work with as well. And then lastly, for subdivision, you may have a tool in your regulations if you have zoning that allows for clustered subdivisions or conservation design subdivisions, which are a form of cluster subdivisions. So this is a tool that we would recommend being familiar with if you have it in your local regulations. Clustering cannot work without zoning, so it isn't something you would probably see in if you're a community without zoning. But the tool is in statute, but it must be also established in your local laws. But it does allow the planning board to consider, if it's in your local laws, it allows the planning board to consider a different configuration of lots other than what zoning requires, if it will have some form of public benefit that is established in your local law, such as preserving open space or farmland or natural resource areas, or maybe even creating recreational areas, whereby allowing for a more flexible arrangement of the lots, typically at smaller lot sizes or with less road frontage needs. By allowing that flexibility, you're going to preserve more of your community and be more efficient in your use of land. So that would be the benefit to the community, which is why you're allowed to provide this flexibility. It is density neutral. What that means is that the proposal doesn't allow for the applicant to create more lots than would otherwise be allowed under zoning. So that's figured out first, and then so that's still the same number of lots that are allowed, but it's just the arrangement of those lots and how they could be utilized that there would be flexibility for. The way that this tool is developed is, again, a local decision, and it would be how much land would need to be set aside, the percentage. Any of those considerations would be developed in your local tool, in that local law or ordinance. And you can incentivize additional like land to be set aside or other public benefits like recreation, et cetera, or even lots that would be for more market rate or affordable housing. And then provide bonuses to allow, which would be probably in the form of some additional lots to incentivize some additional community benefits. So, but that would also need to be written into your local tools. So it's something to check out and keep in mind if you do see that somebody's come before you with a project that really this might work well, or they might ask for you to consider this type of subdivision. So you can propose it, or they can, or the developer could ask for this consideration, and then you would use the tools that are written into your law to establish that.
And Monica, we have a couple follow-up subdivision questions.
Okay, let me, you know what, give me 1 second to just do this slide, and then okay. That will round out these, and then before I turn it over to Paula, we'll take some questions. Just a last note on subdivision, there are some notable review procedures in subdivision that are different than site plan review or special use permits, et cetera. That you do need to be aware of, and so that just in the just thinking in terms of keeping track of our time here tonight, what I will mention is that, and we'll talk about the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SEQRA, in a few minutes, but SEQR, that environmental review for subdivisions, must be considered, and a determination of significance does need to be made prior to holding a public hearing for a subdivision. And that is spelled out in both subdivision regulations in statute as well as in the SECR regulations. So it is important to remember to do SECR as early as possible, and Paula will talk more about that in a few minutes, but it is very clear in statute that that the order of operations for SECR is to complete that prior to the public hearing. And then subdivision also has a couple of time frames that you have to keep track of. There is a default approval process potential for subdivisions. If the planning board has closed their a public hearing on either the preliminary plat or a final plat approval and does not make a decision on the preliminary plat within 62 days of closing that public hearing, then the preliminary plat is automatically approved. And then the same holds true for final plat. So if a public hearing is held on the final plat and that public hearing is closed, then the planning board has 62 days to make a decision. And if they do not, that would lead to a default approval. And if the applicant is aware of the default approval process, they could, the planning board chair would be required to approve the subdivision, and the applicant could go to the county and file the plat. So it's very important to keep track of that 62 days when it comes to subdivisions. If you are concerned about that, you can leave the public hearing open. However, you can only leave a public hearing open, you know, if you're still gathering information and learning from the public, et cetera, and you can leave your public hearing open. You don't have to close it, except that you only can leave it open for 120 days. So there is a time frame for that as well. But those are the two things that are particularly notable about subdivision that are different than some of the other reviews in terms of the statutory language that's written right into statute. All right, James.
Okay, we have a few here. Can a town create a law to limit the number of major subdivisions that are no development or no improvements subdivisions?
So, so this, I'm not sure if they mean create a law just in general, so not per property owner. Mm-hmm. So just in case they mean property owners, you can put into your regulations a limit on the number of re-subdivisions of a particular parcel of the same parcel over and over again. And that's typically put in place to avoid folks that want to avoid a major subdivision review, which is a longer process and does typically take more time than a minor subdivision. So a property owner might come in with a minor subdivision application for 2 or 3 lots, and then the next year come back in for another 2 lots or something like that. To avoid that, you can write into your local regulations that a property can only be subdivided every so many years. 3 years is common, to cut down on that attempt to sort of end run the major subdivision process. So the same thing would be true for major subdivisions. But if it's a question of, on a macro level, can you cap the number of subdivisions generally within a community to sort of rein in growth? If that's the question, I don't think that would be the case. I think that you would should use your density if you're concerned about too much subdivision. Then you would want to look at your zoning regulations and think about different ways to address that through you know, either larger lot sizes or things of that nature to sort of, in certain areas, to prevent overgrowth if that's a concern.
And
that's the best I can do on that one.
You did it well. You did it well. And two quick questions. Is there a required amount of square footage to create a subdivision? And how does Department of Health, how does their approval fit into subdivision approval?
So to the first question, so zoning may require a minimum lot size. That's a typical provision. So if you're in a community with zoning, you probably do have a minimum lot size to create a new lot. Absent zoning, then you wouldn't have necessarily those provisions. So it really depends upon that. So I think that answers that question.
But I think there's something worth saying here, which is, remember, subdivision is about subdividing buildable lots. You don't want to subdivide something and have it be a really tiny lot that you think is going to work, and then all of a sudden somebody's trying to put a house on it, and then you realize you don't, and you have a septic, and, well, you might not have enough room to actually do it. So I always think of Chris Eastman, who's like, do not subdivide into unbuildable lots.
Right. And there are separation requirements for septic and water from buildings and each other.
Exactly.
So even if you don't have zoning, there's going to need to be there's a certain carrying capacity of each lot that's going to need to be required, and it's going to be based on soils to some extent in your community of what kind of septic field is necessary, which could mean you need more like 2 acres to site septic and water. Whereas in other communities, depending upon the soils, an acre or less might easily do it. But that's important. So if you don't have zoning, you might still have other things that as a planning board you should be considering about those lots and where you're going to site all of those things. And you're within your bounds to say that's not enough land, as long as you, we'll talk about this, as long as you can back up your decisions in your findings, then you'd be okay with, even though you don't have zoning. The other question about the Department of Health, so realty plots. So if somebody is developing, if somebody is proposing from an original parcel they can only subdivide a property into 4 additional lots if the lots are under 5 acres. You can only create a total of anything as soon as you hit 5 lots. So the original lot plus 3 more are allowed to be fall under the Department of Health requirements for review and their seeker review. But if you want to develop 5 lots or more, and the lots are under 5 acres in size, then you will hit the definition of a major subdivision for purposes of the Department of Health. And then you will trigger the major subdivision review process. And the Department of Health is a partner anyway in all considerations for septic and water. But in those scenarios, they become, in addition, there's a different layer to their partnership in that review. And they also, that does trigger a different seeker review within the Department of Health regulations. So that is something to keep in mind in that people will develop 5.01 size lots just to get over that 5 acre threshold that the Department of Health does trigger. So that is also a consideration. I'm not sure, I might have been confusing in my response there, but.
That's okay. We keep getting questions about the duration of public hearing. So for subdivision, your public hearing can only go on for 120 days. For every other things, site plan, special use permits, etc., your public hearings can go on forever. It's only specifically in subdivision where that is stated. The same for this default approval process. This is written into subdivision statute. So if you blow the 62-day deadline for site plan review or for special use permits, technically you are supposed to make that decision, but there is no default approval. So you don't just automatically get it because the planning board took a little bit longer to come up for a decision for your site plan review, which actually is the next thing we're going to talk about. So it kind of works perfectly into this. So site plan review. So Monica talked about subdivision, so numerous lots. Site plan review by statute is a drawing showing the proposed development of a single piece of property, or I think of it as a single project, even though it might go across a couple different lot lines. This is pretty much if you're a community that doesn't have zoning, this is really the only way you can have some oversight of development in your community. And in terms of which board does site plan review, it's up to your local governing board to decide. They can either choose to keep site plan review for themselves, or they can delegate it to another board. So there are definitely municipalities in New York State where the governing board conducts site plan review. I think in most places it's really the planning board that does it, and then in some places there might be a zoning board of appeals that does it as well. Sometimes this also, the local governing board might hold on to site plan review authority if it's for something that's like particularly controversial. I think in the 1990s we would see this often for like adult uses. So because of that being kind of a controversial land use, sometimes a governing board might retain that authority for themselves. A lot of times though, I think they would rather not have to deal with some of those controversial issues, so sometimes it's maybe easier to delegate. So site plan review is really up to the components, and you're held to the components of your own local laws and regulations. So your site plan review law should say which review board is handling site plan review. It's also going to look at the uses that are subject to review. So sometimes we do this to, you know, maybe all commercial actions or all commercial uses in our community might be subject to site plan review. Maybe a lot of times the more intensive the use typically is why you'll see site plan review get conducted. You won't probably do it for like single or two-family homes, but you will probably do it for an industrial use in your community. You also have to list the elements for review in your local law and any specific submission requirements, so number of copies that have to go through. Should spell out your local procedures. So we talked about subdivision requiring a public hearing. Site plan review is the one that doesn't require a public hearing by statute, but some municipalities choose to have a public hearing themselves. That would be spelled out in your local site plan review law. And enforcement authority, which usually goes to either your code or zoning enforcement officer, who often wears both hats, for conditions of approval, which is super important, especially if you're approving projects here in the beginning of the year. In the winter time, you want to make sure that, you know, when the work's actually being done this summer, that all the conditions that you placed are actually being, you know, upheld. So, like I mentioned, the review elements should be listed in your local law. So a lot of those elements in most municipalities is looking at kind of how the applicant kind of fits in with adjacent uses. I might look at the location or the dimension of buildings. You might also see how it sort of fits in with other properties around it. So you might consider things like screening or landscaping, especially if it's a noise-producing activity, you might want to especially have screening and landscaping as kind of a way to try to buffer that from the neighbors. You might be looking at architectural features, especially if you're a community that's trying to maybe up your game in terms of community design, and using some of those community design tools in the toolbox. Might also be looking at proposed grades and contours, sewage and storm drainage, and it's been snowing here in Albany, so things like what we do with the snow that seems to happen every day here, how utilities are getting in and out of the parcel itself, your parking, access, and traffic, what the lighting is like on the property, and all the signage, and really anything else. Your site plan review log can be you know, kind of short, or it could be pretty extensive. The important thing to keep in mind here is that you can always ask for more elements from your applicants, but you can't require it if it's not written into your local laws. So if you need, this is also something that kind of comes through as well, is if you want to take a look at some what other municipalities are using, feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to share some samples from around the state. Then there is special use permits, or sometimes what we call the conditional use permits, and that is for a use that is permitted by zoning. So you have to have zoning to use the special use permit. But it is subject to additional review and conditioning. So basically, it's the idea that it'll fit in with the zone, but you're kind of maybe adding some conditions to try to make it fit in better in your community. And this sometimes allows for greater variety of land uses, and recognizes that some of those land uses sometimes do have challenges and some compatibility problems due to its location or the nature of the use. So here in this photo, it's a gas station repair shop. So obviously usually kind of intensive on the neighborhood around it, especially if you were to have just all residential buildings around it. The criteria and conditions for your special use permit should be included in your zoning regulations. And basically you're trying to mitigate any potential adverse impacts to those around the neighborhood. So a thing here might be some of the conditions that you might have, because of the fact that this is also not just a gas station but a repair shop, might be, you know, not allowing more than, you know, 10 or 15 cars parked on the property at any given time. There are 3 types of special use permits. So the permanent one, which is something you would probably give to something like a gas station. Temporary or renewable might be for something that's, you know, like a seasonal outdoor restaurant that has music in the summer, might be a temporary. Could be renewable in the fact that they have to come back after a certain period of time to make sure that things are still working the way it is. Another important thing to keep in mind about special use permits and variances as well is that the special use permit runs with the land, not with the landowner. So if the business owner has a special use permit and they sell the business, the special use permit moves to the next owner of the property. So if they're still doing the same, holding up, you know, the conditions in their end of the bargain, they shouldn't have to come before the planning board for another special use permit. Your decisions have to be tied to your local criteria spelled out in your special use permits regulations. And it's really important that if the project meets your criteria and conditions, you can't deny it just based on the fact that maybe the neighbors aren't too happy with it, or it's, you know, a controversial land use. Unfortunately, you know, it's really tough sometimes to deny these permits. And often in a lot of communities, you do this as both site plan review and special use permits. So a lot of times it's up to the planning board to do both, so you kind of work through it together. And then other regulatory roles, again, it's going to depend on your individual municipality. A big one that planning boards typically tend to do is sign control, so focus on kind of the size, the design, the location. You might also have a historic downtown, so you might have some historic preservation, or you might have a separate historic preservation board that you would be taking recommendations from. And that's the same for architectural review as well. So we typically tend to see more of those boards in things like cities, just because there's a lot more going on, and typically there's also professional planning staff that usually can be helpful in terms of you know, being staff to these boards. But if you're in a community where you're really trying to up your game with maybe design, you might also consider things like architectural review and the applications that come before you. Okay, I'm going to send this back over to Monica to talk about the back end side of our presentation about public meetings and hearings.
Thank you. Just before we go on, just a couple of answers to a couple of questions regarding special use permits. There was a question about whether or not you could deny an application for a special use permit if there was already a concentration of similar businesses within a zone. That's not a reason in and of itself to deny an application. If your zoning allows it, allows the use, then just because it would be a saturation or because it would, you know, compete with other businesses is not a reason that would stand up if you wanted to use that as a reason to deny an application. And then there was a second question: if somebody wants to expand their operation and activities beyond what was originally approved, would that require a new special permit approval? Yes, because you're approving, you know, if it's beyond what was originally approved, then any additional operations that expand that would require approval as well, as long as that new activity, you know, is within that special permit requirement. If it's an activity that is allowed without a special permit, then it wouldn't require that review. But as long as you're expanding, somebody is seeking to expand beyond their original approval, then they should come back in for an amended special use permit approval. All right, shifting to public meetings and hearings. So now we're sort of talking about the nuts and bolts of the process that would apply to any application or the planning board's conduct. So we're going to start with public meetings. Because the planning board is a public body, they are subject to the open meetings law, as well as the Freedom of Information law. Both of those can be found under public officers law. And if you would like more information about these beyond our discussion here today, we would recommend looking at the webpage for the Committee on Open Government, because they have a wealth of information and they sort of oversee that part of statute. So that's a good resource for you. So in terms of, because the planning board is a public body, all deliberations and meetings are open to the public. And when we say open to the public, you must provide access so that they're able to come and listen and observe. There is not a requirement that you allow the public to speak at meetings generally. That tool is the public hearing, and then and we'll talk about that, where there is then a requirement that you allow the public to speak. But for public meetings generally, there is not a requirement that you allow the public to speak. Many planning boards have a slot within their meetings where they allow for a public comment period, et cetera. That's fine and great to invite public comment, but it's not required. And then all meetings will need to be noticed, which we'll talk about in a minute. and there are provisions related to executive session. The use of executive session should not be used to basically have discussions about matters before the board generally behind closed doors. That's not the purpose of executive session, which we will talk about the purpose in a minute. All deliberations should be happening at in the open meeting. So there shouldn't be deliberations through email or deliberations outside of those public meetings or in executive session, except in certain circumstances. So as I mentioned, there should be, all meetings should be accessible, allowing people to easily get into the building, have a space that accommodates the number of people that you expect at meetings, and provide for that venue and select your location for planning board meetings so that that access is available. In terms of notification of meetings, you do have to provide notice to the public and media. For purposes of the media, if you have a schedule for your planning board meetings, you can provide that schedule to the media at the beginning of the year, for instance, that you meet every second Tuesday of the month, and that's your calendar, and that would be the required notice, unless you were to hold special meetings, in which case those would require a separate notification. In terms of noticing the public generally within your community, you should provide notice of meeting dates on your website. If you use a physical bulletin board like the one in the picture here, you should post agendas and time frames for meetings there as well. To the extent that you use your website for a variety of purposes, you would use your website to notify the public for planning board activities as well. In terms of the time frames for notification for meetings, it's based on the time frame is in terms of notification is based on the amount of time prior to the meeting. So if a meeting is known about at least a week prior, then you must provide notification at least 72 hours or 3 days prior to the meeting. If knowledge of the meeting is, the decision to have a meeting is within a week, then you need to provide notification to the extent practicable. This probably applies less to the planning board and more to local governing boards who might need to meet in an emergency situation, in which case they may call an emergency meeting with very little notice, and then they should get notification out as quickly as possible, recognizing that you may need a meeting that you're calling for the next day, for instance. So that's what that second bullet more applies to. And then in the box here at the bottom, Public Officers Law now requires that materials be made available on municipal websites at least 24 hours in advance of any meeting. So this is a provision that has been in place for a couple of years now. The idea is that if a municipality is using their website for other purposes, they should also be providing materials so that when people are attending meetings or even watching meetings at home, they have access to the materials that are before a board. And this provision applies to all public bodies, not just the planning board, so it applies to the Zoning Board of Appeals and governing boards as well. So those materials include things like applications. You can redact sensitive information. So it's applications, agendas, draft meeting minutes, resolutions that may be on the agenda for approval. All of those materials should be provided online in advance of a meeting. It can be very helpful to get the public aware of what's actually being proposed. Sometimes there's concerns about a project that may be unfounded, and the ability to, look at materials in advance may, squelch some fears or at least inform the public about applications prior to a meeting so that if they're interested, they come to a meeting more informed. So for executive session, for the planning board, there really are not a lot of instances where executive session really should be necessary. Public Officers Law Section 105 discusses the 8 scenarios under which executive sessions are permissible. And there are really only a couple that would likely apply to the planning board, and the main one would be actual litigation. Actual litigation does not mean somebody has threatened to sue the planning board. It's where there's actually been an Article 78 or what have you in relation to a matter that pertains to the planning board. So it's not just the threat of litigation. There could be something else if there's somehow a personnel matter that involves the planning board. That would be the history of a person. That's what that bullet refers to. But in general, there's not a lot of scenarios, which means you really shouldn't be going into executive session all that often. If you are going into executive session, the process is that executive session is part of the regular meeting. If you know you're going to go into it, then the planning board would put it on the agenda and the reason for the executive session. If it is invoked in the middle of the meeting without it being on the agenda, then you would still state the reason that you're going into executive session. You would then hold that executive session, and then you have to come back in. You would make a motion that you're going into executive session. Then you would come, once that is concluded, you would come back out and resume your regular meeting. So it's part of the regular meeting. You would then need to, if you have no additional business, you would then close the meeting and everyone could go home, or you could resume the meeting to conduct additional business. And if you do go into executive session, Paula will talk about some instances where you may need to take meeting minutes associated with that. But again, it is not something that you should be utilizing too frequently as planning board members. It's a tool that probably has more role for other bodies. So we mentioned a quorum early on, so we're mentioning it again. If you don't have a quorum, you shouldn't have a meeting because there really is no business that would come before the planning board that wouldn't probably require some level of a quorum in order to even, like we mentioned earlier, even to open a meeting, you would need a motion and enough people to agree to open the meeting. So don't have a meeting if you know you're not going to have a quorum. It's better to reschedule it and have a special meeting than attempt to do any work in that scenario. Work sessions and agenda meetings are both considered to fall under open meetings law. Even if you're not going to make decisions, but you are going to discuss public business, things related to business for the planning board, then those are considered subject to open meetings law. Most of those work sessions and agenda meetings are probably subject to open meetings law, just by the nature of what they usually are made up of. For site visits, that can be a little bit different. We strongly encourage site visits for all applications before the planning board, or at least most. It's very difficult to understand a project by staring at an aerial or a site plan on paper. I will say I always feel like things seem so much more spread out and that there's a lot more room for everything on paper than it may be at the site itself. So it's really important to do site visits as much as possible, or at least for some members to go do site visits. And it's not just to get a sense of the location for the proposed project itself, but it's also to understand what's going on around that site, potentially on adjacent sites, et cetera. Having said that, if you're going to do site visits, you can go as a group or as a quorum. of your board together and not be subject to the open meetings law if you go with, if you are just there to observe and acquire information, which really should be the only role of a site visit in the first place. So there really shouldn't be a back and forth discussion about the application or the proposed activities at any site visit. It should really be to just observe and acquire information about the existing site. But if you do go as a group and that's all that you are doing, then you may not be going against open meetings law in doing that. In that case, the court case on the screen here, Riverkeeper v. Planning Board of the Town versus the Planning Board of the Town of Somers, covers that scenario where Supreme Court did decide that as long as you're just there to observe and acquire information, that those visits would not be subject to the open meetings law. It can be very difficult to do this, so we would say that if you want to be on the safe side, don't go as a full board. You know, go individually or maybe just 2 of you at a time. Or if you do want to go as a board, then put a notice out there that it's a public, and it'll be noticed like a public meeting that you are doing a site visit. Those are the 2 ways to avoid running afoul of open meetings law. But even if you are there in 1s and 2s, remember that you're just there to observe and gather information. You shouldn't get into a back and forth with the applicant about the proposal. And then we have this slide, remote participation in video conferencing, because we do get a lot of questions about this. But there are 2 scenarios here with regard to remote participation. So starting with public locations. So board members may participate via video conference or, you know, on Zoom or WebEx, what have you, if they are in a public location when they are video conferencing in. They can be part of a meeting in that way, but they do have to be in a public location. If you're going to have a meeting of that nature, then you would notice where the board members are located as part of the notice, so that if anybody did want to go in person and sit in on that person's video conferencing, they could. There's no local law needed for this option. I don't know how common this really would be at this point for local planning boards, but if you can picture the scenario of like in state government where you know, the Buffalo office staff might need to have a meeting with you know, be part of meetings with folks in Albany, and so everybody's in public buildings and they can video conference in because the public could access those meetings as necessary. The question that's more likely is the non-public locations. So open meetings law does authorize public bodies to adopt, so the local governing board could adopt a local law that allows members of public bodies to participate from non-public locations. So that is something they would have to do at the local level under extraordinary circumstances. Extraordinary circumstances is not defined in statute, so that would be something that you would want to define in that local law of what constitutes the circumstance that would allow for that remote participation. And then in those situations, as long as there is a quorum of the board in a public location, so the rest of the board is in, for instance, town hall, and then one person is participating from a non-public location because they had to leave town for to help family members or something, then they would be able to participate from that location if you have a local law that allows that. The one caveat to this is that the fact that that person is going to be participating remotely would need to be included in the notice of the meeting, so that it's known to everyone that they are participating in that non-public location and where that is. So it's not something you would do last minute. In other words, if somebody suddenly couldn't make a meeting, it would be something that would need to be planned, and again, you would need to have that in a local law. For more information on this, we have a link to part of the Committee on Open Government's webpage on this that you can find out more information. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Paula.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions, I think, about the non-public one, which basically, unfortunately, it usually ends up with somebody who might be long-term illness, who might not be able. You wouldn't actually notice their home. You only notice the local or the public locations, but you need to have that local law, so it's really up to your governing board to decide if you're going to allow it and then what those extraordinary circumstances are. But again, the rest of the board would have to be in a public location, so really the only time you can really do it is really with like 1, maybe 2 people, depending on how big your board is. Anyways, we're starting to run out of time here, and there's lots of questions coming in, which is great, so keep those coming in. So getting organized with a clear process. So I think this is really helpful for both applicants and for sometimes the public to understand how this all works as well, because we've all had experience with the public feeling like they don't know what's going on either. So for applicants, we find that being clear with who they're going to talk to first. So in every municipality, this is different. If you're lucky to have public or have planning staff, they're most likely going to talk to your town planner. But in a lot of communities where you don't have a ton of municipal staff, it might be your municipal clerk or board clerk or a zoning enforcement officer who has part-time hours in your municipality. Making sure that we are posting our application materials and forms on the website. I am a big fan of frequently asked questions because a lot of times, maybe more so for the Zoning Board of Appeals, because you might have more of an instance of the public coming before you and maybe not so much for the planning board because they need some kind of like minor area variance for like a fence or something. But people get pretty, they don't totally understand zoning or land use regulations. It can be kind of a little kind of scary for them to understand. So frequently asked questions can sometimes be a really good way to kind of make the process a little bit easier for them. Making sure that you're using revision dates on your form so you're just working with the same stuff. Make sure that you're providing seeker environmental assessment forms because most likely they're going to have to take a look at answering part 1. And make sure that you have clear submission requirements, and we're huge fans of checklists, so sometimes it's really helpful that they can just check off like, okay, I need to send a plat over or a survey. I need 3 copies of, the application. Here is, any other evidence that they might have that comes before you. Make sure that you are making those application due dates long enough before the meeting so that the board has a chance to take a look at it. So sometimes it's like 2 weeks before the meeting to get onto the next agenda. Make sure you're clear about how many copies are needed and what application fees are important. Or needed for to get the ball rolling. For reviewers on the planning board itself, again, those clear submission deadlines are super important because you want to take a look to make sure that what's coming before you is complete and that you are ready to come prepared to work at the meeting. So sometimes this actually also includes doing that site plan or site visit that Monica just talked about. Again, posting those applications on the website. Make sure that you're redacting any necessary financial info. We don't want that to get out there. So that's important because that makes it easier for the public to understand what is going on in your community, and what you're looking at is when they can kind of get a chance to look at it as well. So at least 24 hours, hopefully, before your meeting, you're putting that up on your website. Using your checklists internally as well to track submissions and incorporating timelines, especially for that subdivision, because of that default approval. You want to make sure that you're kind of keeping things moving and that you don't fall into the trap of the default approval. And if county review is required under General Municipal Law 239M, send the counties copies of everything that's submitted. Hopefully you have everything that they'll need. They can always come back and ask for more, but we'll talk about that in a little while. Adoption of board procedures to be binding should be adopted by the governing board by a local law or ordinance, but hopefully even if you have ones that are kind of informal, that would be okay as well. But typically your board procedures kind of explain what the duties of officers are, how to handle applications from non-owners, because you don't want to go through the whole process and find out that the owner is not unaware of the application that's before their municipality. Signature on official documents typically goes to the chair. Who is going to prepare your agendas? Who's calling your meetings? We had a lot of questions before about calling meetings to order, opening and closing. Again, there's nothing in statute that says that you have to do it that way, so a lot of people use kind of Robert's Rules of Order. You can choose to use that or not. It's up to really your governing board to make those policies for all the boards in the municipality. But I did want to make that clear as I was doing this one. And then how do we handle things like public hearings? Who's putting together your minutes? Are you a group that approves your minutes, or how do you go about editing those minutes if you find that there's issues? Usually it's a clerk that's helping you through that process, hopefully. And who is referring stuff to the neighboring municipality for 239? And who is sending stuff to the county. So again, usually it's a clerk that's kind of helping you through the process and kind of keeping everybody tabs on everything. Then there is public hearings. So Monica talked about public meetings where the public gets to watch and listen to their government at work. Public meetings are specifically held for the purposes of public comments. So this is the opportunity where the public gets to have their say in what's before you. So typically we see this specific for the preparation of the preliminary comprehensive plan and site plan if it's required locally. So the Zoning Board of Appeals is really good at public hearings because they have to basically have a public hearing for everything. Planning boards don't typically have to for everything, but they do for a lot of their work. So for hearings, the state noticing requirements themselves are obviously having it in a public meeting requirement, so open to the public. Legal notice in the official newspaper, that's generally 5 days prior to the hearing date. And yes, you still have to publish it in a paper. We know that a lot of newspapers in municipalities across New York State are struggling right now, but this is how it is listed in open meetings law and in statute. So while yes, we understand that sometimes it's really difficult to find a local paper, it does have to be, a paid-for subscription. We might see changes to that in the future. If you're struggling there, that might be a reason to talk to your assembly and senators about the difficulties there. Also, you might have to tell your regional park agency if it's 500 feet from a state park or parkway, and the requirements for 239M and N as well. That's letting the county know. And then there's this local requirement examples include signs on the application property, which I think are great because sometimes we send certified mailings to the property owners, but if they rent out their properties to tenants, it's better they might not know about it at all, but it might impact them. So signs on a property is kind of a best practice. You might do mailings. You don't have to do them certified mail, return receipt, but you might mail to the neighbors. And most importantly, placing it on the municipal website and kind of sharing it. Then there is the notice to the adjacent municipality. So this is General Municipal Law 239NN. We like to say NN means be a nice neighbor. And this is for subdivision, site plan, or special use permit applications that fall within 500 feet of the adjacent municipality. You have to send notice of the public hearing to the adjacent municipal clerk. So you send that by mail or email at least 10 days prior to the hearing. You don't have to wait to hear back from them, but the idea here is that most likely something that close to the municipal boundary might have an impact on residents in the adjacent municipality, and it's basically giving them the opportunity to also come to the public hearing and be part of the process as well. So, so that is 239NN. And finally, we're moving into making legally defensible decisions, which is, of course, really important because we want to make sure that all the hard work that you're doing for your community is going to be upheld if you're challenged. And we start with everybody's favorite review, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, also known as SEQR. And we do a whole 90-minute show on this, and we do another hour-long show on this. So it's really hard to do this in just 2 slides, but we're going to give it a try. And the important thing to keep in mind about the State Environmental Quality Review Act is that it is an information gathering process. It's not giving you a red light or a green light. It's basically just requiring the municipality to consider the environment, which is defined extremely broadly, of an application or an action before them. So what happens here is the lead agency, or the agency, proposes an action. So this would be things like your governing board deciding to adopt new zoning regulations. They would have to also consider SEQR in their action. Or for planning boards, most of the time you are receiving an application. So for site plan or special use permit or subdivision, so you're receiving an application. The applicant's going to do part 1. Then you're going to decide as a board, you're going to classify the action. So this is where you're going to look in the regulations at the type 2 list, the type 1 list, and if it doesn't fall on type 1 or type 2 lists, it's considered unlisted. And the idea there is that type 2 issues are thought to have a very small impact on the environment. So it kind of, once you have a type 2 action, it kind of closes and concludes the environmental review. A type 1 action is thought to have a pretty significant adverse environmental impact, so you have to collect more information about that impact to the environment before you make your decision. And again, if it doesn't fall on the type 1 list or the type 2 list, everything else is unlisted, which I think happens a lot of the time because the lists aren't that long. And then the lead agency is established. So typically what happens is the board that's making the decision and has the most amount of work before it typically ends up being the lead agency. So an example here is like if you have a subdivision before you, it would make sense for the planning board to be the lead agency. But if they need a area variance because of they have, irregularly lot sizes and they need minor area variances, you might have a coordinated review where the Zoning Board of Appeals might help you through the SEQR process. Then the significance of action is determined. So if it has a pretty significant impact on the environment, you're going to have a positive declaration, which means we're going to collect more information through the use of the environmental impact statement. If you find that, there's not, or there's a way in which you can kind of condition and have a negative declaration, the significance of action might be a negative declaration, which would close the seeker process. If you have the pause deck, you go through the environmental impact statement process. It does take a while to get through this. It usually is a month-long process. And then you eventually find your way to your findings and your agency decision. So if you are a flowchart person like I am, this kind of makes it a little bit more sense. So you classify the actions that you receive the application at the top. Then you decide together if it's a type 1 or a type 2 or unlisted. If it's a type 1, you have to have the full environmental assessment form. You might coordinate reviews with other involved agencies. So sometimes this happens also if you are receiving funding from the state. You might have a coordinated review and then inform the agencies that you're working with about it. Then you review the criteria, you determine your significance. If you have a positive declaration, you move on to scoping and the preparation of the draft environmental assessment form. If you find that it is a negative declaration, it ends the seeker process. And as you see on the right-hand side, the type 2 no review. So if it's unlisted, you start with the short environmental assessment form. If you find that you need a lot more information, you typically then move into the full environmental assessment form, and then you kind of follow the same thing. So we just did seeker a couple last month to start our process. So the recording is on our website and on the schedule. So make sure if you're feeling a little queasy about seeker, there is some resources for you to get in touch with. And now Monica's going to talk about the agricultural data statement and kind of take us into the close.
So I will go as fast as humanly possible, but if you could just bear with us for a few minutes to wrap this up. So the agricultural data statement. Planning boards are also required to consider the impacts of a project on nearby farm operations in the form of an agricultural data statement. So in new, more rural communities, this may be something you have to sort of keep in the back of your head for a variety of different projects. The trigger for the ag data statement is any subdivision application, site plan, special use permit, or use variance application that is within a state agricultural district or within 500 feet of a farm operation in a state agricultural district. So state agricultural districts are not your zoning districts. These are, it's a state program where farm operators can voluntarily choose to be in an ag district, and then they are afforded some protections. Our counties are the administrators of the state ag district program, and they have developed maps of ag districts and within their county, which do get updated from time to time as farm operators come in or leave. And so those maps do fluctuate as they get updated. But if a project is either located in an ag district or if a farm operator in an ag district is within 500 feet of a proposed project, you will need to include an agricultural data statement. The applicant can provide this or the planning board, but ultimately it's the planning board's responsibility to make sure that it gets completed. And basically you're going to identify those farm operators. There's a form that the county probably has available, can provide the planning board with that is used. And they list who the farm operators are and provide a map of where they're located. Something similar to the one on the screen here would work using a tax map. And then those farm operators are notified about any application, and the county's notified. And then you, as the planning board, then must consider whether or not there would be impacts on farm operations based on the activity. And this affords the farm operators a chance to comment potentially on projects when the public hearings roll around, et cetera. For more information on this, we have the citation of Ag and Markets Law on the screen where you can learn more about it, or you could give us a call or talk to your county. I'm sure they can provide more information. But it is something that may be required depending on the project that's before you. So we do like to mention it. And then the county referral process is an important one. Paula touched on it briefly, but that's under General Municipal Law, Section 239M. And this is a required review process under certain scenarios. And it's really to give the county an ability to look at projects that might be for you for any potential impacts that they may have on the region or any intermunicipal impacts, because maybe the project is located near those municipal boundary lines. And they're really looking at your project through that lens to make sure that there's consideration. And it may be its location, or it may be the intensity of the project that could have impacts. It could be even because it's located near a regional water body, for instance, or something like that. So the thresholds for whether or not something requires county referral are here on the screen. But basically, any special use permit, site plan review application, any zoning amendment or comprehensive plan adoption all require referral. Subdivision applications may be required to be referred. It is up to your county whether or not that is required. Not all counties review subdivisions. So that's been a decision made by the county, and you would need to understand that going in. You should know that about your county and make sure that you're aware of whether or not you're supposed to be referring subdivisions. And then any of those applications, when they're within 500 feet of municipal boundaries, state or county parks or highways, state or county streams or institutions, land within a state or county building or adjacent to within 500 feet of those. That includes things like salt sheds, so it doesn't have to be the courthouse. It could be, any county building. And then within 500 feet of farm operations in a state agricultural district do need to be referred under county referral. And so in terms of how that works, so you would send all the submission materials that you received for an application would go to the county. That would be what's considered the full statement there in bold. All of that must be sent to the county for their consideration. And then the county has 30 days to respond back to the planning board on the application. If a planning board does not hear from the county within 30 days after they have received the application, you are able to move forward with your deliberations unless you receive a response back from them within 2 days of your meeting, or 2 days, at least 2 days prior to your meeting. So it may be past the 30 days, but if you have heard from the county and your meeting is not for another 3 days, then you're still required to consider the county's input. You should not you may forget this step in the process. It's an important one to remember to do, because if you do fail to complete the county referral process when it's necessary, if you are challenged on your decision, it would overturn your decision, nullify your decision, and you would need to start all over again if that comes up in a court challenge. So it is something to not overlook. If you remember it, but now you're ready to make a decision, you forgot, don't make a decision and then condition approval on getting a positive recommendation from the county or a negative declaration from the county. You need to get that approval before you make a decision. So unfortunately, you should just put the pause button on the project decision-making process and get that county decision before you move forward. And in terms of the decision from the response from the county, there are several options here. If the county determines that the project is of no regional significance or intermunicipal significance and it's really a local matter, they can respond that it's a local decision only, and they may have advisory comments, but that's all, and then you would just go about your business on making your decision or continue your review process. If they recommend approval or disapproval or approval with modification, then the only way to act contrary, if you want to act contrary to their recommendation, you would need to make your decision with a supermajority vote of your planning board. So on a 5-member board, you would need 4 members to vote the same way. So you can override that county recommendation with that supermajority vote, but you would need to do that as well as if they recommend formal modifications to the application. You would, if you want to override that, then you would also need that supermajority vote. So something to keep in mind, and then you would submit a final action report to the county, and if you did act contrary to their recommendation, you would let them know why you did that. All right, voting. We've talked about some of these things, so I'll just touch on a couple of important things. So we already talked about the need for a majority of the fully constituted board for that to be a decision. So if you don't have a majority of the fully constituted board, if you have a 5-member board, 3 members are there, and you vote 2 to 1, that is not a majority of the fully constituted board, so that would be a no vote. So that wouldn't be a vote that counted. So you would need in that scenario 3 votes in order to pass any motions and any whether it's a denial or approval on an application. Members' votes should be recorded and in the minutes. And if a member misses a meeting on an application, it does not mean they shouldn't be able to vote. That's what meeting minutes are for. If meetings are recorded, they could watch the recordings. So they can vote even if they missed meetings. That shouldn't be a reason to abstain from voting either unless they missed multiple meetings, et cetera. We really strongly recommend not abstaining generally. You should vote. Some votes are not easy, but and you may have difficult decisions to make. But if you don't vote, especially if you have quorum issues, that could really affect the outcome of an application, even if you haven't voted. So really think about that. And there is no anonymous voting or voting through email. The votes need to take place during the regular, during meetings. And then findings. So in addition to voting, you may have put together findings, and this is to back up your decision. It can be really important, especially if controversial applications. We would strongly recommend having a narrative or some form of additional findings that talks about why you made the decision, supports your decision, supports conditions if you've placed conditions on the application, tie those decisions and those conditions back to your law and what it says in the law that you're able to do as a board on that application. Base your decisions on facts, leading to conclusions. Don't assume what you're hearing from the public is true. Do your own homework, do your own investigations. Make sure that you really understand the implications of the applications, and make your decisions based on those findings, and write those down. Include them in a record. This will help you if you're challenged in court. They should be included with your voting record decision documents. These should be filed with the municipal clerk along with any other documents. Speaking of that, all local level determinations must be filed with the municipal clerk. And the decision documents include resolutions, forms, and meeting minutes. They should be stamped in by the municipal clerk with a date, because the date of that documentation will start the clock for when somebody who feels they are aggrieved by your decision could file an appeal in state Supreme Court. That is the only way to appeal a decision by the planning board, is to go to state Supreme Court. You can't go to the ZBA or the governing board if you're unhappy with the decision. Somebody that is unhappy would have to file in state Supreme Court. They have 30 days to do so. And all decision documents once approved, must be filed with the municipal clerk within 5 days of those approvals. Just tying up loose ends, last slide here on that, send a copy of your decision to the applicant. Don't forget about them after you've made your decision. If you had to do the county referral, make sure they get a copy of your decision and attach your findings to your decision documents when they're filed with the municipal clerk. And here are some resources for you. All the statutory references that we made tonight are in our Guide to Planning and Zoning Laws of New York State, which we have on our website at this location, this link that's on the slide here. We can provide you, you can download it as a PDF, or if you are interested in a paper copy, please email or call us and we can send you one of those. But it is a compilation of all the statutory laws related to planning and zoning, broken down by the type of law, so town law, village law, general city law, general municipal law, etc. We also have these some other publications on our website. The whole James Kuhn series on planning and zoning is available on our website, as well as these legal memos that you see here on the screen. So they might provide more information for you when you're doing your work. And then you can always call us or email us. We are here to support you. I'll go back to this slide, but our contact information is on the last slide here. We do pick up the phone. We do respond directly to your emails. So if you call this number or email, those emails do go to us, and we'll be happy to talk to you about anything we discussed tonight or other matters that are before you. That is the main role of our staff at the division. And this last slide, as Paula mentioned, at the beginning, certificates may take up to a week to be received, so please refrain from calling and emailing looking for your certificates. We will get those to you, but we do have a lot of them to prepare, so be a little patient with us. When we send the certificates, we will also send a link to this recording so that you can refer back to it if you would like to. And then finally, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being on your boards. And for new board members, welcome to your boards, and definitely reach out to us whenever you need. We are here to support you. And I don't know if you have any other final words, Paula?
We did not. I think I tried my very hardest in the past half hour to try to answer everybody's questions.
Oh,
so
thank you.
If
yes.
we didn't get to it, please email us.
Yes.
Or pick up the phone. We're happy to answer your questions. I tried to get through. I might have missed a couple of them. So if you didn't get an answer from me, or I don't totally understand exactly what you're asking for, again, please email us. It's thelocalgov@dos.my.gov. Or give us a call anytime. We're happy to help you guys. And again, Happy New Year. Hope you're all healthy. And again, we'll talk to you all. If you're joining us for Zoning Board of Appeals, we'll talk to you again next Monday night. Cheers.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us tonight. All right. Good night.